Hello, welcome to Table Talk. I'm your host, Karen Wilson, and we have a very informative show for you today. Our special guest is Captain R.C. Christian from the Tennessee Highway Patrol, and we are going to talk about the new hands-free Tennessee law. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, good. With lots to talk about.
We do.
This is the hot subject matter right now going on.
It definitely is.
For those who have been living under a rock.
Yeah.
But I guess, we hear it, but how that applies to us and some ways that we can maybe remedy talking on the phone. Tell us, I guess, what the Tennessee hands-free law is.
Well, I guess one thing, that I guess automatically when you kind of, many times people want to know what can I do and what I can't do. But I think the primary thing to remember is that this law was enacted, just to try to curb, some of the crashes that we've been having that's been caused by distracted driving, particularly, pertaining to cell phones. And when you look at, just the mindset of that, we love our phones. I mean, I'll be the first person to admit, you just count on that and being in contact like you do. And the mindset behind it was just to change that behavior. And looking at, kind of the difference in the law and kind of what it is now, it's just the law was changed, which was effective July the 1st, of course, where you can't hold a cell phone with any part of your body. And I mean, you can't support it or anything such as that. Of course, you can't write, send, or do any, text-based communication with it with your hands as well, while you're driving. Another thing that's important as well is not reaching for something to get you to where you're outside of, how your seatbelt fits you as well. And that's always a very important thing, wearing your seatbelt and wearing it correctly. And that's another aspect of the law. Many people like watching videos and stuff on their phones, and, that prohibits that. You can still listen to videos naturally, but, you can't, sit there and, thumb through some kind of media app
YouTube videos.
No YouTube videos now, I mean, you can listen to them, but you can't thumb through on your phone to change them.
Right.
And, or can you record, something that you're holding your phone on as well, while driving.
Right,
and
no
that's
Snapchatting or anything
correct.
like that.
That's kind of the biggest elements in the change of the law. So basically anything, when you think of hands-free, it's hard to get much plainer than just, don't any aspect of that, And
Like you said, no propping of the phone up on your leg or anything of that nature. So I guess it must have been, distracted driving has been a large problem in Tennessee and throughout the United States. It's not just Tennessee. Is there a certain demographic that you've seen that just tends to utilize that phone more, or are we all that way now?
To an extent, and what we found, and we maintain our stats. We look at that because that's how we address trends and how to fix things or address things that we need to be looking at. It was kind of we look back for 3 years. In 2016, it was kind of the group between 26 and 45 years old that had the most distracted driving crashes. And when I say in this area, I'm talking about the upper Cumberland, the area that we're responsible for, that I'm responsible for, I should say. In 2017 and 2018, it was kind of that group, from 18 to 25. And there wasn't a lot of, increase, between them and that second group, that 26 to 45 group. So that's pretty well been the age group that we have found that's had the most issues, with the distracted driving. And, the subsequent things from those crashes and the things, that have stemmed from that.
Right. Seems like we've all, regardless of our age, has adapted very well.
Very well. We like being in constant contact. We like that instantaneous message. And just being able, or that instant being able to get to that call and.
Right. Well, and I think, you and I talked about that earlier. We've almost instilled that in the kids where it's like, if mom or dad calls you, you pick up that phone and you better tell me where you are. And if,
Right.
And so we've kind of molded our kids to, answer it if possible, and now we're having to go back and be like, yeah, don't answer that if you're on the, you have to pull over to answer.
Yes.
If it's that important.
Right. That's the key. Is it important?
Right.
Is it something that can truly wait? And though we may feel that it's not, we may just think the gravity of it is enormous. Chances are, a great majority of the time, it's something that could truthfully wait.
It's almost like we have to reset our minds and go back about 20 years.
Absolutely.
To where it was, everything could wait till you had a phone, till you got to a phone. So let's look at the numbers for our surrounding counties from 2009 to 2019. We've got Coffee, Cumberland, Grundy, Van Buren, Warren, and White. The numbers that I pulled was that there was 3,975 wrecks attributed to distracted driving. Of course, that sounds like a lot, but then when you pull numbers from Nashville, Murfreesboro, Knoxville, they skyrocket up into the 20,000s and stuff. But we're all traveling through these places. They have a lot more distracted drivers than we do, but how can we travel safely through these larger areas where there is more distracted driving?
It's kind of and I say an error, it's kind of like, and I've compared this before, go to Walmart in a place like that, or, a retail place compared to one around here. And it's a way of life, and I mean, it's just the hustle and the bustle and everything that there is there. Obviously so, when you look at those larger areas, there's more registered vehicles, there's more, licensed drivers, and there's going to be more vehicles on the road. So here we are, and we go to visit those places to, like you said, shop, go to the doctor, whatever the case may be. One of the biggest things that I've always, and I've talked to teenagers about this and people that's beginning to learn how to drive, is to drive defensively. And with that, I say this right here, not only look at your own expectations of what you think you're going, that you may do, expect the unexpected with the drivers that's approaching you. Prepare for that vehicle to pull out in front of you. Be able to give yourself enough, reaction space to be able to adjust if something does happen. Following too closely, that's always, a big contributing factor to crashes in places such as that. People that are, too close and doesn't, give themselves ample time to stop. When it comes to us going to places like that right there, the biggest things is, just, you never know if somebody wants to go ahead of you, let them go. I've had people that's passed me, when I've been off duty, of course,
Of course.
but they'll do that, and and sometimes there may just happen to be an officer up the road that might have intercepted them, when they're doing some kind of enforcement action. But the biggest thing is just expect the unexpected. And, if you think they might do it, be prepared for them to do it. And I'm saying pull out in front of you, stop in front of you, lane changes, and give yourself ample, space to be able to react, to those unexpected events that take place.
Right, yeah, defensive driving is always, that's a great tip. And anticipation, that person, and then maintaining your cool. I think sometimes that's the hardest part.
Yeah, patience is, I pray for patience every day.
Well, we all need it, especially when driving, that's for sure. Going back to the new law as far as the hands-free, what are the penalties if we, find ourselves in a situation where we're pulled over for breaking the law?
Okay, there's, I guess, looking at the penalties of it, I guess the first part that's important for people to know is every time that you or I should say convicted of an offense, it's 3 points on your driving record. And if you get more than 12, you could have your license suspended, within the year's time, when doing that. Now, when it comes to the fine for that, the fine for the individual violations is $50, per time. Now, of course, naturally that escalates. If it gets to be like your third time, or if the violations, maybe resulted in a crash or something such as that, it can go up to $100 for the fine. And something that's, of course, has already exists, and this law kind of builds upon some of the laws already in place, but kind of like the school zone law and things such as that with your cell phones as well. But if you do that and you're in a work zone or that school zone, it can be a $200 fine. And just being mindful that each time it's 3 points on your driving history, and and as those escalate over time, naturally, you could lose your driving privileges because of that.
Well, and you hear some people say, well, how are they going to know I'm on my phone? But what are some things you're going to be looking for?
Well, obviously so.
If you can share your secrets.
Well, I don't care to share my secrets with anybody, one thing, and I'm just going to be, very honest about this, people are so complacent to what they're doing that it's kind of like habits. You do things and you don't even realize you're doing it. And a lot of people, I can see, without even thinking, their phone could not be ringing and they're reaching for it. It's just that you count on, and I guess it's kind of like, something you just count on to be in, I guess, caught up with everything, or however you want to word that. But people look down. I've seen today on my way to McMinnville, I see people that still, they've looked at their phones, and stuff such as that right there. It's actually very obvious, when you see people, and like I said, many times they don't even realize what they're doing.
I tend to agree, because as I'm, learning about the law, and as it's, the education part of it has come, you do see a lot of people who their eyeballs are not up here. They're driving down the road and you're like, they're looking at something other than the road.
Hoping their peripheral vision, lets them know, hey, something's happening ahead of me as well.
And there are a few exemptions to the law. Tell us about those so we will not get alarmed if someone is on their phone.
Well, the biggest exemptions, that obviously, law enforcement, fire, EMS, emergency management, people such as that right there. And I can tell you the Highway Patrol's perspective on this, if we utilize that in that capacity, it's going to be an event that warrants that. We are, it needs to be a work-related event, and that's the times that we would be on it. Now, another exemption, deals with, utility workers and contractors of those agencies, and it's always important, when you say in the scope of their employment, that's just a big fancy word, but you got to be able to, they're on the job, and it's something relative to the job.
Right.
If they're calling you and telling you, to bring home something from the store on your way home from work, that obviously wouldn't qualify. But those are some of the biggest exemptions, as far as looking at when you can use it and when you can't. And, one thing that, another thing that's important is being able, that people understand they can utilize it while, utilizing their GPS. That still is a provision where people can utilize that. And it's kind of funny the way that's worded, because it says, someone 18 years or older, because the existing law with the, our young people that's 16 and 17 years old still can't use a cell phone, period. And, that's been in place for quite some time.
Wow. See, I didn't even realize that.
See, they get it because when they go to get their driver's license, that's part of their test, their driving test in most cases. But, that's why that doesn't list them, because it doesn't apply. They are able, they're not able to use the cell phone, period. And obviously so, any exemption, that comes up that deals when you got an actual, what I would say, emergency, and that's not, I mean, that's something
You're on the
that's
phone with 911 or
correct.
something
And
like
you would
that.
have to articulate, being an emergency. And there's a common sense approach to all of that.
Right.
That's just not something that, to what some people think is an emergency, some may not. But, when you think of something that's a life or death matter, or you feel like your life's in danger, and you've seen people that follows, we get calls like that. People feel scared because they think somebody's trying to,
Follow
abduct them
or
or something
right.
like that, or do something to them. A lot of it is in the mind of the person that's making that call, but that's an important thing to recognize. If it is an emergency, that's an exemption as well.
I will say too, there's been talk about that here at work because we are a utility company, and even though our workers would be exempt during work hours taking work calls, they are still going to get Bluetooth devices for them, because it's always just better to be safe
It is
than to
better to be
rely
safe.
on the exemption.
And that's something that, I have found, and, we've already got troopers that have bought headsets and things such as that. And I know troopers that already have them to be able to use in their cars. And it's funny, you Google that to see what kind of options you have available to you. And, they range from, I've seen them anywhere from $20 to $50 for a headset, or some kind of Bluetooth device that you can utilize in your vehicle if you do not already have one. So I guess what I'm saying is, even the older vehicles that don't have the, the fancier, Bluetooth,
Through the steering wheel.
correct.
And,
You do have options where you can, still maintain and abide by the law. And that's obviously a very key thing, to be able to, that makes you legal. I mean, we've, tractor, commercial vehicle drivers have been doing that for years, too. So it's just more habits, that we're going to have to adjust for. And it's still, I can see the safety factor, and just having that headset there. But once again, you got to be mindful of that term, distracted driving.
Right.
And that's what it all refers to, and that's what it's all about.
And even, with the GPS, using it on your phone, probably recommend the little mounts, I guess, the suction. I was bad about driving and, holding
I totally
it.
understand.
And one eyeball on the GPS and the
Yeah.
other one on the road.
Oh, there's the road.
Yeah,
turn real
exactly.
quick.
So it's time for me to get that suction cup mount and put it up there.
I understand.
What you and I talked about even before, how this is just a habit for us that is just ingrained. Is there going to be a grace period, or July 1st, you're susceptible to a ticket?
Well, I will say this from, the Highway Patrol perspective, the way we're going to look at this is, we are really, and that's the good thing we're here today, we are here to try to, utilize education as much as possible. And we hope to do that, for at least two months. I would say around Labor Day, around September the 1st, we'll start getting a little bit more aggressive, and we'll start doing a little more enforcement. But our ultimate goal right now is to educate, and I know a lot of people are aware of this law. I mean, it's out there, and it's on billboards, and you see it as well, and it's your desktops, your work, your computers, there's little things that's been coming up about it, and the news has had it as well. But this is a pretty big change.
It is.
And there's going to take a lot, and I can speak personally, there's a lot of adjusting for that because, the busyness of my job, I still have to discipline myself. And I'm getting adjusted to it just like everybody else is.
Yeah.
But we're hoping to do that, and then in around 2 months, probably around the Labor Day holiday period, we'll start getting a little more aggressive and, probably start issuing some citations for it.
Would have been good if they had just rolled this out when the cell phone was invented, and then we would have just never picked up these bad habits. But and let's go back and talk something too about something that's been a law for a long time, which is the seatbelt laws.
Right.
So let's see how have the restraint, are people kind of adopting to that? Well, has it evolved or changed, that law?
The interesting thing about Tennessee's seatbelt law, and I don't mind telling you that I'm very passionate about the seatbelt law, because it's really hard, Karen, when you see somebody that would still be alive today if they had just taken that 3 seconds to put their seatbelt on. And the big thing in Tennessee in 2004 is the last significant change that we've had in the seatbelt law. And basically what that did is when that all come into play about the child restraint laws become so, intense, if you will. And basically what that did, in 2004 is made it where basically any child under, 8 and under that was less than 4 feet 9 inches tall is supposed to be in some type of restraint device. Whether it, and there's phases in that. You've got the infant carrier naturally, and then when they get 1 year and then 20 pounds, you can make them forward facing. By law, some people prefer to keep them rear facing, even up to 18 months, and can even 2 years if they so desire. But sometimes if that's a growing child, that child's going to get past that pretty quickly, and their bone structure and stuff kind of gives you some ideas about when to move them up. But with the seatbelt law, that starts there, and then you will go forward facing and move them up to a booster seat. And the law also stipulates that any, up to 8 years old, they need to be in the back seat of the car if available. I mean, obviously, if you're in a pickup truck, it's not available,
right.
But they should be back there, and they recommend it from ages 9 to 12 as well, and then of course any person that's 17 and under has to be restrained anywhere in the vehicle. And then, of course, 18-year-olds, in the front of the vehicle beyond that.
Okay, so you said 17 and under,
yes.
Regardless where they're sitting.
They have to be restrained.
I'm going to use that on my kids.
Yes, they have to be restrained, and that law is in place. And it's kind of a thing, the way the law was written. When you're 15 years old, that would fall under the person that's driving the vehicle.
Yes.
Now, when you're 16, that would fall under you. It would be assessed to the 16-year-old. And the reason being, by 16, people are establishing their driving history, and they have all of that there. And the great thing, when my daughters were little, they automatically knew as soon as they got in our van, it's time to get in your car seat and buckle up. And you start that behavior, and it's a learned behavior. You start it young, and when they get older,
don't even think about it.
They don't even think. It's just a natural thing. And even though the law, talks about that, let me say, if someone's in the back, I mean, if you can imagine a guy my size and I'm in the back seat and we have a head-on crash, I'm going to be coming forward and hitting, whoever's in front of me.
Well, and I've thought about that with the doors flying open. You take someone that's not restrained, the door's open, they could be thrown from the vehicle, they could be, as you said, thrown through to the front. So it's just important to have it on regardless of where you're sitting.
I have always found, and like I said, I've been in the Highway Patrol for 30 years, and the things that I've seen, and it's hard, when you're there with a family, and you just, think, man, if they would have just buckled up, they would, they wouldn't be here, mourning the loss of someone such as that. And another thing too, if you have that seatbelt on and you're in a crash, the chances of you being seriously injured are decreased, a great deal as well. And we strive to, and do that enforcement. And, when you see fatalities occur and people are restrained, at least they had kind of a chance, if you will.
Yes,
and,
did everything that they could possibly do.
And I've heard people say that, well, the car overturned and it caught on fire, it, might have landed in water or something like that. Those percentages are very, very low, and I'm talking in some cases less than like 0.1% of your total crashes, and just varying degrees of contributing factors, but that's not
the norm in an
accident.
No, it's not the norm, usually. And I will say this seems probably silly to some, but talking about distracted driving and things like that, buckling those or having pets. I see so many people, that's messing with their pets in the back seat or that restrain them too. I mean, that is so important. People driving around with their pet in their arm.
Oh, that's true. That's true. And look at that, the weight, whatever that weight is, you know, or you've seen people that has objects in their back seat that's not tied down. I mean, you know, you can kind of figure, you know, the amount of force is the speed times the weight, you know, and that's going to be the amount of force that'll be coming forward or wherever, you know, the direction of the crash that's dispersing the impact. And that's kind of how that you know, that goes. But
True. Remember when we rode in the back seat
oh,
of the
I
glass?
remember when we rode in the back of pickup trucks and everything else, you know.
Used to, it was kids back there. That's how we rode to the beach, was in the back glass of the car.
Yeah, and you know, when you rode in, just the thing, you'd fight, you know, so you could sit on the fender well, you know, because that was the good seat.
Yeah,
you know, I remember
exactly.
those days very, very well.
So let's talk about, I guess, what are the contributing factors in some crashes in our viewing area or in the Upper Cumberland?
You know, I guess some of the greatest things, and you know, when you look at, and when you say the Upper Cumberland area, you know, we kind of look at the hub of the, you know, the area that Ben Lomond serves, and you know, the counties that they serve as well. And something that we find is, you know, you have a lot, of course, car versus car, you know, and with that, when I say that type of impact, you looked at the contributing factors for that, and to great extremes, you know, I'm talking, you know, somewhere in the area of probably 80 to 85% of those, you know, are people that they crossed the center line in some way. They didn't maintain their lane, you know, they didn't, you know, keep in the proper lane in any way, any shape, form, or fashion. So many times, you know, you can attribute that directly to distracted driving.
Very true.
And then when you look in there and you see cell phones and you know, things, and you know, we've opened cell phones before, you know, in crash scenes, you know, and you can tell that they were on that phone or about that proximate time of the impact, you know, they were on their cell phone and things such as that right there. Now, granted, you know, you're always going to have the fare to yields when people pull out and, you know, inattentive, you know, people are eating or talking or looking at other things. But, you know, the big contributing factors with that, you know, are they're just not paying attention. They get out of their lane, and like I said, that's why, you know, you're excited, you know, when you see laws like this, because you know that's your goal. And, you know, and that's why, you know, we put our uniforms on every day, you know.
Safety.
You do, and, you know, you want to save people's lives. And, you know, people talk about, you know, well, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing that. But, you know, at the end of the day, when you look and, you know, when you look at about 30 fatalities, you know, that we have in our district this year, you know, that's 30 families that's been affected in some way, you know, by the death of these people. And, you know, and I mean, if it gets to the point that you know, I mean, you think about it, you realize that's what your core mission every day is, to save lives. And, you know, some people get frustrated, people say things, but that's why we, you know, are out there in them black and tans.
Yeah.
You know, traffic is our thing, and you can see the significance of that. You know, I mean, it's not been too long ago, even in Warren County, you know, we had a terrible year. And, you know, a lot of enforcement, you know, and that's all these agencies working together just here alone, you know, made a difference. And we had a lot better than next year. And, you know, this year's kind of, you know, it creeps up on you, you know, when things just start happening.
We'll get through this holiday weekend.
We hope so. You know, there's always a lot of things going on. And, you know, we've got extra people that'll be out for the July the 4th and other times as well. You know, I mean, Labor Day will be here before you know it, and it's amazing. We was talking earlier just how quickly this year is flying by.
Yes. Well, you know, we'll remind everybody that the law is meant to save lives. It's not meant to be an inconvenience.
Absolutely.
It is going to be a terribly hard habit for all of us to break, but with time, I know, and I'm sure the state troopers and they all know that we can do this.
We hope to.
It's just breaking a habit, and we'll get through it.
Absolutely.
But I appreciate you coming and educating us on that. I'm sure that you're welcome to take questions anytime.
Anytime. I will say that Hands-Free TN, you know, you can look at that on the internet, or, you know, my email, you know, can go to tn.gov stateside.gov/safety and highway patrol offices, and I'm at the office in Cookeville. My email is there, and my office phone, and I'll get the message, and I'll anytime. A lot of people have my phone number. They call me a lot, which I'm glad to talk to anybody.
And you also will help with child seat safety check restraints.
We do, and we have techs at the office in Cookeville. If anybody ever needs a car seat checked, we have now, everyone in my office, we have certified people there every day. Would be glad to look at it. And I know we're going to plan some more to get out into the field. And September is Child Passenger Safety Month. There's a couple weeks there that we do things like that.
Okay.
Really hard. So
and
we'll be able to do that as well.
Any local police officer, regardless of what county, whether it's the city or the county, would be probably glad to check that as well.
Absolutely, direct you in the right way. That's for sure. Because that's a very precious resource we're trying to take care of there.
It is. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. And thank you for coming to the table to learn more about the things going on in your community. We will remind you, put that cell phone down and just drive and keep your eyes on the road and both hands on the steering wheel. We invite you to come back again next week for more Table Talk.